Welcome to UMFK and to our forum on helping children deal with tragedy, grief, and loss. And my name is Scott Bazin, and I'm the Dean of Community Education here at UMFK. This function is being sponsored by UMFK, MSAD number 27, and Northern Maine Community College. So I want to thank all the sponsors for participating and as well for the speaker. Okay, there we go. Yay. And I want to thank all of you for choosing to come tonight. And I just want to tell you that we're going to have a very informal presentation. We would have done that even if we filled the place. I'm going to introduce three speakers to talk about different areas, specifically mental health issues related to helping children with grief and loss. And Tim Joke will be here as well to talk a little bit about school preparation for tragedies and such. So I'm going to, without further ado, introduce the speakers in order. Our first speaker will be Connie Malenica. She's been a social worker for MSAD number 27 for about 17 years now. She holds a master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis. After Connie, we will have Dr. Eve Walensky. She is the attending psychiatrist at Northern Maine Medical Center. She's board certified in general and neuropsychiatry. And last but certainly not least is Tim Joke, who is the superintendent of MSAD number 27, AOS 95. Prior to that, he served as principal of Fort Kent High School and as superintendent of Madawaska School Department. So please join me in thanking these individuals for being here to speak. Each individual will speak as long as they feel they need to. We've talked about, there's been some interplay between all of us about what we're going to talk about tonight. So I think we're just going to start with Connie. And Connie, you want to lead us off? And after we're all done talking, we can open it up to questions from the audience. That sound good for everybody?
That's good.
Okay, and after everybody's done talking, I have a set of handouts with some pertinent information and some websites that could be helpful for parents. So feel free to come get one of those after the event. So enjoy the event.
Thank you. I'm going to speak to a couple of things, and Dr. Walensky will promise me she'd chime in. So I guess to start with, I just want to say a little bit about tragedy and or trauma, because a lot of things, even though we're talking about a tragedy, a recent tragedy, this is what kind of brought us here, that really any kind of tragedy and trauma, what we're putting out there fits for those things as well. And that's important to remember. And that there are many different types of traumas, and that makes a difference in the response. But just as the type of trauma makes a difference, the age of the child, past trauma, resources they have available, all of those things are going to make a big difference in terms of the response that you actually see from a child after a tragedy or any kind of trauma occurs. I think one of the most important things that I want to touch on is the difference between children and adults. I wish I could remember where I've seen it many times, but in lots of literature about mental health in children, to remember that children are not little adults. Children are their whole unique own person, and which makes things difficult to deal with sometimes, because we look at it a certain way, and sometimes we kind of assume that children see things similarly, but they don't always. So that's kind of the tricky part of it. And many kids are very sensitive, and they struggle to make sense of things. And there are things that don't make sense. And actually, one thing not related to tragedy that comes to mind when I say that, in working for the district, it took a few years, but I remember it seemed like every year we had, of course, this is a very Catholic community, but every year it seemed like we had kids in second grade all of a sudden having lots of anxiety and lots of questions. And in talking to teachers, a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times it seemed related to religion and all the prep for First Communion. because children would ask questions and there's not concrete answers to questions about religion. And so for some kids that really elevated their level of anxiety. So when you think about that and then think about something like trauma or tragedy, you can imagine as they're trying to make sense of it, and it doesn't make sense. There aren't answers to some questions. And the other thing about children is they'll come up with kind of unrealistic and kind of out there explanations for things too, or magical thinking. They'll sometimes literally feel bad if they've had bad thoughts about somebody or wished someone would get, I mean, it happens on a small scale even in school. You know, maybe they don't like somebody else and they have a mean thought and then the kid falls and hurts themselves. You know, kids will literally believe it's their fault. And I'm talking very average kids, and it can happen to any kid. So same thing when things get big, as they're trying to make sense of things, who knows what kind of explanation they'll put to what happened. I guess I'll switch gears and...
Connie, just before we switch gears, I think part of that is they lack the experience that adults have to fall back on things that previously happened. Adults can always fall back on something that previously happened in life, but when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, there's a little to fall back on, so you have a harder time making sense of something. So, would you say that's accurate?
Very true. And you haven't seen as many things resolve themselves. We've all had difficult things happen, and things do get better. But if you haven't had that many of those life experiences, you're not sure. So it seems, the world seems a little more iffy.
And Connie, can I ask you, I think it's okay, we can ask questions and we'll make this a conversation, but I guess you said something that piqued my interest. You said, a lot of kids will react differently because they don't make sense of things. It's hard for them to make sense of something that doesn't make any sense. And I guess my question, and maybe this will be answered as we go through this discussion, is, well, the reason we're here tonight is in reaction to something that we all think doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I mean, we heard a lot of adults saying things like, I just can't believe it's beyond our scope of imagination that somebody would go into a school and shoot 20 plus kids and little kids. And so I guess if I were a parent, I would struggle because I'm thinking the same way the child is thinking. And I guess what do you say to a kid? I mean, that's an open-ended question. We can talk about that later. But it's a very difficult thing to do when it doesn't make sense to us, let alone a child.
And I think with any difficult conversation with kids, you can only tell them what you know. And sometimes the why questions are really tricky, because sometimes it is okay to say, I don't know. And depending on the age of the child, there would be some factual information you could share depending on the age of the child, but yet none of us does know exactly why that happened. And not that kids are even going to, they might say, if they know enough detail, why did that guy do that? And we don't know the answer to that. We might know some information, but...
Follow up, Eve, or just
thank you. Well, I guess I certainly agree with everything that's been said. I think that it's very hard to address these questions in a general way, and that's why I'm hoping there'll be questions from the audience, because each child and every family is in a different situation. And the way that a child reacts to this who has absolutely, may have heard about it on the news, but has no contact, or has never been to Connecticut, may be very different from someone who comes from a family that visits relatives in Connecticut, or from a child that may know someone from the area, or have a more direct contact, or in a family where there may have been an incident where someone was injured or harmed in a violent manner in the past. So kids, they do have a much shorter history than adults, but they do bring their history and their circumstances to how they react to things. And I think one of the most important things that a parent does is they know their child better than anyone. And so when children have questions or they're asking you things or just bouncing ideas off of you or looking to you to explain what happened or give them information, your response is always going to be conditioned by what you know about them. What have you told them about other things? If a family member died or a pet died, or if your family had some other kind of problem. So what you're doing is both giving them information, but also modeling for them what was mentioned previously, that you have life experience, that really bad things can happen, and it's tough, but we get through it and things get better. I think it's very important for adults to also consider what's their own reaction to this kind of situation. Adults may have something, if you've been fortunate, perhaps you've never been touched by violence in your life, or this experience is really outside of your personal history, but some adults have had very trying experiences themselves, and these events may trigger anxiety in them about the safety of their own children, or bring back memories of other incidents and so on. So a very important step for parents and anybody who's working with kids is to kind of check your own mental status and your own reaction to the situation, and make sure that you've got the support you need to deal with it if it's something that's affecting you in a significant way, so that you can be there and modeling very well-proportioned, calm responses for the children. I'm sure there'll be questions. So
you mentioned something about comparing a reaction to something they may see on the news or something that happens in your community to like a death in the family or death of a pet or something. Are there differences in those kinds of reactions on kids, or is it pretty much the same?
Well, it really depends. Will vary a lot, also depending on the child's age and their level of maturity, and what their range of life experiences has been. Children do tend to be kind of egocentric and see the world as revolving around them. Even very nice, considerate, thoughtful children tend to interpret events as somehow being related to them, and that was something Connie touched on in terms of magical thinking. Children, again, it may just be a coincidence, but children often feel guilty if their parents are fighting. They think it's because they disappointed their parents. Or there may be something in their life, even like that they dropped their notebook and that got all wet and muddy, and the next day they heard about this, and somehow those two things get kind of connected. Those kinds of unusual connections are more common in younger children who actually don't fully understand cause and effect and don't have enough life experience to know what's realistic and what's not. And sometimes we actually refer to that kind of thinking in children as primary process. It's almost like a dreamlike logic. So it's illogical. It seems connected and very meaningful and hyper-significant to them, but it's not fully logical. And as children become older, they become much better at understanding cause and effect and having more realistic explanations for what's going on, but they are not fully in control of their emotions, and they may experience disproportionate levels of emotion or impulsivity, or just that kind of feeling that something terrible has happened and they don't know enough about life to know that it will get better. And so they may kind of get more and more depressed about it or more upset about it. And what they need from the adult at that point is assurance that yes, this is a really bad event, but we're going to survive this and things will get back to normal.
Tim, you want to?
I've always felt that in some kids, how they react to it with anger. And if we react back with anger as adults, then we multiply two wrongs and we don't make a right. So sometimes the anger is only a natural reaction for some kids, and we need to sit and listen. The best thing we can do is listen to kids when they have questions, and especially in times of traumatic experiences.
So, I mean, I'm sure there'll be questions. Tell us a little bit about, in reaction to Sandy Hook and others that have happened, what kind of, what kind of procedures did schools in our community take? It'd be interesting for those people who don't have their children in school to see, what happens behind the scenes in schools.
Right. Sandy Hook was quite unique because we've had three major school shootings in the last probably 7-8 years. The worst school shooting was Virginia Tech College. Happened in April. Bad time of the year. Really, spring is not a good time of the year for people after going through the whole winter. Then we had Sandy Hook was the second worst, and Columbine High School was the third worst. I was telling people that the worst is actually 1927. It was a bomb that was set off in a Michigan school, killing 45 people. But I guess that's later in time. They don't record it for the news. So the difference here is we feel bad for any school shooting, but when it was a college school shooting, it was like, oh, did you hear about Virginia Tech? It was shooting on college campus. And then, geez, Columbine High School. Those kids get hurt at Columbine High School. These are first graders. And intrinsically, we feel a lot worse when they're younger and go through a traumatic event. And that's only human, I guess. We don't want little kids to be hurt. I guess we don't want older kids to be hurt. But in this fact, Sandy Hook really threw everybody in the education world for a loop, because who would have thought first graders would get gone down the way they did. Schools for a long time have been thinking about this. What we use is lockdown drills in our schools, and it's a hard and soft lockdown. There's many reasons. Schools all over the country have been using procedures like this, so if there's an intruder that is around the school, they'll make an announcement, tell the teachers to lock your doors, close your shades, and put the kids in the safest part of your room that you can, so the intruder doesn't see you. We've had an intruder. The last intruder in the main school was in Stockton Springs, which is just outside of Belfast. It was about 3 years ago. An intruder went in and had a hostage situation. So there was no shooting, but he was intense, and the main schools kind of stood up and took a look at that also. We've gone to cameras. There's more cameras today in schools than ever before. When I grew up, you'd never see a camera in your school. There's cameras everywhere today. Outside, inside, on every entrance. All the schools in 27, most schools in the county you'll see are going to locked doors. The only thing we haven't done yet as a group of schools is kind of ask you why you're here. Do you have an appointment with somebody? We haven't taken that step, but I think we may see that come out of this. The parents I've talked to personally called them up and said, what would you think if we didn't allow you to come in unless you had an appointment? They said, after what happened in Sandy Hook, would not be a problem. I wouldn't have any problem with school doing that before. I would have a big problem. But, everybody knows each other, but, when I don't want to go through the whole school shooter profile, I could, but we'd be here all night, and most of these people have a revenge of something that's happened, and most of the time, somebody else knows about it. And we have to build a culture in our schools that is open to people saying, I just heard someone say that something bad was going to happen next week. And be safe enough to come to the office or to a teacher or a counselor and have that conversation. So, and schools need to build that culture within their faculties, their administration, and their community, that it's safe to say, I just heard someone say something that didn't make me comfortable. So.
Yeah, I just want to jump on that. Our campus, of course, reacted to Virginia Tech. That was way too close to home for us. And I was the dean of students at the time, so I was on the emergency management team. I'm no longer, but it's amazing how these incidents, regardless of the age group, always makes you rethink things. We had a meeting on campus with staff and faculty right after Christmas, and we had somebody come in to talk to us. And I think one of the things that I heard, it was a great meeting. We had some good discussions. We have a very good emergency management plan, and we have you guys have all heard the foghorn. If something bad happens, we have the test. You can pretty much hear it anywhere. But we have a communication system through our email and voicemail and those kinds of things. But you can never plan for everything. No matter how many tabletops you go through, you just can't plan for anything.
You can't, and that's the one question I've had. And Tim, they're safe, right? Kids are safe. If they're as safe as we can make them today, I mean, you safety is something you can't even have enough of, but we can't prepare for everything. I mean, Columbine is a great example. These kids brought 20-pound bombs into their high school, and they made them in the basements of their homes, and parents had really no idea they were doing this in the basement. So, it's you can't prepare for everything. There are definitely concrete, fast, steady things you need to do every day to keep kids safe, and that's lock your door while you're teaching, keep your doors closed, lock your exterior doors, make sure everybody stops at the office, put up your camera systems. Schools have not become the aggressor. Don't know what the future will bring. But right now, our drills are to lock our school down and to go into a lockdown mode and basically hide kids. And I'm very proud of those Sandy Hook teachers. They did exactly what they had to do to keep that situation from not getting a lot worse than what it could have been. So.
I guess we're going to open it up to any questions from the audience. Go ahead.
I've got a couple. Go one at a time. You mentioned religion is being a source of anxiety to these children. As far as
you're going to get quoted on that one.
No, it's not negative at all. How do you feel that religion plays a part as far as causality? They might see like bad things happening, maybe as a result of punishment for things that have happened. If children are to believe that if God controls things or whatever, maybe they might see things as punishment. In an imaginative perspective, and as well with guilt feelings about perhaps being the ones that were spared, and how that might play a role in it.
That's a big question. There's certainly that, if I understand the question correctly, there's certainly that chance that just like we talked about the guilt feelings and the magical thinking, that kids could feel that way. And I guess working at a public school, that's where it would get tricky. It's easier outpatient, but I think one of the things that certainly, even if I skip over to death, that certainly there are things that I've talked to kids about in regards to death, but always include the family, because what I can safely say is that a family's religious or spiritual beliefs helps a lot with explaining things to kids. I mean, those are things I can't do because I don't know what their beliefs are. And I think if there were some of those feelings that involving the family and helping the family discuss with the child how to kind of help them kind of turn that around, because that could be a danger. I mean, they could feel like, okay, why are these bad things happening to these kids? What did they do? And I think it's trying to help figure out, it's not a logical thing that happened. There's not an answer to why it happened. So I guess I would probably go about it from that angle. You have thoughts on it too, but I think certainly that would be kind of mythical thinking and trying to help squash that, because that would be really scary because we all make mistakes every day. So trying to live with that burden would be pretty tough, and trying to help kids understand it in a different way would be helpful.
I'll grab the why do these things happen question a little bit, and I know I don't have the answer, but again, I think how when work on that with kids depends a lot on their age. Younger children are primarily going to be seeking reassurance, and so when they ask why does it happen, they don't really necessarily need a very logical, mechanistic explanation of slot A fit into slot B and so C happened. They really want to be reassured that there was a bad man and he did bad things and he's gone and he can never hurt you. Older children, though, there is a lot to learn about life, and the truth about life is that we have violent members of our society. We have people in our society who are not strictly speaking mentally ill, but have a lot of difficulty with anger management, and revenge was mentioned as a factor that sometimes motivates these kinds of behaviors. And we also have people in our society who are genuinely mentally ill and sometimes carry out actions that are extremely violent and that seem illogical to the rest of us because of their mental illness. And at some age, children do develop the ability to start learning about those facts about our society. And so there may be opportunities here to start educating children about anger, the different ways to manage anger, being more understanding about the fact that some people can have a mental illness, and even, again, mature teenagers might even be interested in the pros and cons of different kinds of gun control or ammunition, or some of the safety issues that are being debated. This is a discussion that, again, older children might be able to have with their parents. Would you be upset if the school only allows me to come to see you by making an appointment? So I think that certainly there's no definite answer to the existential question, why did those particular children have to go through this horrendous experience, and why did some of the children die and not others? Those are very deep questions. If the family does have a spiritual focus, a clergy person you might want to involve a clergy person in clarifying what the spiritual framework is for understanding how this fits into God's plan. But again, for older children, sometimes I think there are elements of this story that can actually, that this is not a totally unique event in the world. There are places in the world where it's terrible to have to know about it, that children are being killed all over the world in wars and violence, and there are some people who will set bombs for a political reason or a strategic reason, and they don't concern themselves about the fact that children die. Everyone chooses a level of avoidance or denial of these very ugly facts about our world, to have comfort in your daily living and to be able to enjoy your daily life. And part of what we do as parents and teachers and caregivers for children is to try to model for them how we keep those things in proportion, how we know about these facts in our society, how we try to deal with them constructively, without dwelling on it to a morbid or obsessional degree.
Let me ask you a follow-up question on that. I guess, bringing it to an obsessive degree. When is it, and I guess that's a very general question, I apologize profusely because I know there's different age groups and such, but when is it time to get the professional involved?
Children are really generally very resilient, and even children who have been directly involved in the trauma, again, not children who are hearing about it on the news or something that happened in a distant location, but even children who have been directly involved in a trauma or a natural disaster, for example, like the children who went through Hurricane Katrina, for example, maybe even some families here who went through the flooding a few years ago and things like that, or a family has a fire in their home, for example. Most children will really get back to normal within a few weeks. And if children are showing unusual behaviors, if they're kind of off from their baseline and it persists and persists and persists and it seems to be getting worse and it's not getting better, then that's the time to get an assessment. Or if there's anything going on in the child's behavior or what they say that raises concern that maybe they're going to do something dangerous to themselves or to someone else.
I fully agree. I mean, I think it's 100% accurate that once you feel as a parent or even a teacher that this is not getting better, it's getting worse, I think in that time, and I think you should rely on the schools. We have a lot of resources for that. And if we don't have the resources, then we know also when to refer out and get even further help. Because if they're acting that way at home, they're going to be acting that way at school. And it's going to impact their life. It's going to impact their school. It's going to impact their friends, their grades, family life. And I think at that point in time, it's not a bad thing to call for help and set up a meeting and kind of work it through there.
I'm going to ask you another question. I'm sorry, I don't want to hog it all, but you talked about teachers, and I remember when 9/11 happened, I was was working here then, and I was actually teaching a class, and I was interrupted out of my class at that time to kind of see what was going on. And I remember the next day coming back to campus because I had to teach the next day. And I remember even with college students, I mean, I had a really high level of anxiety as to what I was going to say, you know, because I knew everybody wanted to talk about it, or it was in the back of stuff. So I thought, you know, after the Sandy Hook, I wondered about the teachers who were going back into classrooms. That on that following Monday, I thought, they have the worst. I would not want to be a teacher on that day. So any suggestions of, you know, what a teacher, I mean, talking to your parent, your child is one thing, but talking to a classroom full of kids is another thing. Any suggestions there, or what the best approach would have been for a teacher?
We made sure in SAT 27 that we had a meeting that morning with all the building teachers around before any class started. And I even went to Wallgrass because that Principal Wallgrass went to Eagle Lake because he has both schools. I know Gary met his faculty and Mr. Mishu went to St. Francis. And we sat down, took about 40 minutes to an hour before school started and just processed the whole thing with teachers and then through. The older the teachers are, my philosophy is it's not a bad idea to talk. I mean, the older the students are, it's not a bad idea to talk. The younger students, it's more, my thing is to involve the family, let the family time to decide where they want to go with it, try to keep your day as normal as possible. If there's questions that come up and you're really not comfortable in answering, we have counselors on site that the kids can go to and talk to. But don't try to be someone who's, you know, I see that in the news with this guy. And we actually told our teachers, don't stand in the hallway saying, did you see what happened? Yeah, because kids will hear that and they get nervous. And we want to keep everything as normal as we can. I find at a younger age, but as they're older, I mean, there was times to process and talk that out too. But that's kind of how we handle it in our schools. And I remember the day I was principal when 9/11 happened, and I was just beside myself. I couldn't imagine what was going on, and I was the principal of Madawaska Middle High School, so I had grades 6 through 12. And then on minute's notice, I had to make a decision, and I went into the high school rooms and I said, if you need to turn your TVs on and watch this because this will be history. It's similar to Pearl Harbor. I went to middle school and I said, you need to keep teaching. There's been something that's going on, but do not turn your TVs on and make sure you just teach. And when the kids go home, they'll find it out through their parents and process it that way. But I'm just who I am. I just think the high school kids, you know, if you're a senior and junior and you want to witness history, this was happening and we generated pretty good discussions when we put it. Right then I had to make a decision what age group gets to see this or not. I suppose I could have said nobody watches it, but I really think high school kids, it's part of learning. For the middle school kids, they didn't need to be seeing it, and we just went on a normal class. So it was very...
Follow up on that?
Yeah, actually, I want to strongly second that approach. And I was actually online today, and I saw an article in the Kennebec Valley Journal where they interviewed the principal from the Stockton Springs incident. And she was reflecting on it. It's now several years ago, but one of her comments was that she did not recommend, what she said is to turn the TV off, but she was really talking about children in the elementary school. There's no, think of it as like, you know, video games are age-rated and movies are age-rated and TV shows are age-rated, you know, and every parent may be different in what they think is an appropriate level of content for their child. So some parents won't show kids certain types of horror movies and others might. So be consistent with your, you know, kind of think about what's in that information. And if it's too graphic that you wouldn't show it to your kids as entertainment, then it's really too graphic to show them as reality.
Other questions? That's good.
I remember when 9/11 happened, and I was home, and I had a student that wasn't yet in school, so he was 4. And we just want to understand it, so the TV was on all day as the events unfolded. And the next morning on the news host, they said, if you have devastation in us, turn the TV off. And that magical thinking was, every plane is flying into every building in every city. They just thought it was many, many planes, because he kept showing it over and over. And I would have never thought of that. I always like to have that heads up and shut the TV off and learn on it on my own time. But there are going to be some kids that really don't understand what happened with Sandy Hill. And where is Sandy Hill? How far is that from here? How close is it happening to us? We just can't. The way we're thinking in this way. So, that is a nice reminder to the show.
And I remember there were, I don't remember exactly what happened in middle school versus high school, but I do remember that there was, I remember one teacher in particular that did watch it with the students, but I know that at least one teacher had to be told to shut the TV off, because that's, again, it goes back to something you said earlier, but that's hard as an adult because they couldn't. They were having a hard time. Once they saw it, you wanted to keep watching it, but you couldn't. And that's not even good for us as adults, but it just kind of pulls you in. And so imagine the effect that does have on kids. That's harmful to us as well. And the anxiety level just keeps increasing.
I know. 9/11 Sandy Hook, all this. I guess I'm a CNN junkie, but you get to the point where you literally get physically sick.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. The day it happened, I was in Bangor with my wife. I took the day off, and we had to do some appointments in Bangor. And I do have the CNN app on my phone, and I can't remember if I was in the car in the mall or going to this appointment we had in Bleat, massive school shooting in Sandy Hook in 14. I just said, oh no. It's just how I said, oh no. I didn't even feel like doing anything the rest of the day. Because you got to remember, these teachers love these kids. They are their kids. They're more than family. They're somebody else's kids, and they do what they can every day. And if you're in education, as long as we have been, you're in it because you love children. And really, it's not about money. It's not about, our purpose is to make a better world for these kids. And when you see something like that happen, just even for an adult, it's like, oh God, it can't happen. There are, when I thought about this talk tonight, this is more than school shootings. I mean, I was a principal. I was assistant principal in Madawaska in '98, and in 2 years I was a principal, and up to 2001, and in 2002 I became the superintendent. But in the 4 years I was a school administrator, I had 4 student deaths. It's unheard of. We had cancer, we had suicide, we had a massive car accident, we had a hit and run in Canada, and it was just, to go through that and make sure that not only you're thinking of the family, but you're thinking of the sophomore class that just lost a classmate. And how do you handle that? And communication is the biggest thing. And then you actually go through it again in high school because graduation comes up. And we had a classmate. And every one of the graduations, I must say, I was very proud of what we did. We actually had a chair with a gown and a rose and a picture. And every time the parent come back and hugged me and said, it really was great, And the classmate was still with him, And I didn't know that when I was assistant principal or principal. It was just something we listened to people and understood what was the best angle to go with. And I guess parents in the class said, no way, we don't want to picture it up, we haven't done it. But those are all traumatic events for schools. And when you lose a classmate, it's very hard on the whole class to kind of get going and be normal. It's almost, you need to celebrate.
Yeah, their lives.
Yeah.
I had a question over here.
I just wanted to comment, I'm one of those parents that decided to shield my children from it. Very much, my children are 8 and 10, they're both in the third grade. When you think about other parents, children. And we have one here. We just moved 2 years ago. And that little girl went to school. The kids went to her told her that it was her school. It was her friends. And she had to internalize that all day. So I think it was a very good thing to have to tell them that. But I do think that it would be up here so prevalent amongst students.
I don't want this to sound awful. I don't, we got kids of all ages that go through our schools. Kids are very programmed kids. It doesn't matter if they're seniors, third graders, fourth graders. And if you have kids in school, you've had a time where someone has said something very mean to your own child. It's happened to me. It's happened to some of us. And
I don't think they intentionally, they just went to her and said, your friend's died.
Yeah.
And she's like, they're nasty. She moved me to school. And they said yes.
Yeah.
Which wasn't true.
Right.
But I chose, my children have had a tremendous amount of loss. We lost their father in April, we lost their grandfather in October, and in the shooting. So I chose to not tell them about this because of all the other loss. I should have said something.
I definitely know you're not alone because
Yeah.
there were plenty of kids that didn't know. And that was one of the reasons we did what we didn't advise folks to do, teachers to do anything, especially in the younger grades, in terms of any acknowledgement of what had happened because we knew. In fact, one of my colleagues whose kids are older than that said when she was coming to a meeting at the school, her friends are like, or her kids were like, why? Why do you have to go to school on a Sunday night? And they didn't know. So unfortunately it happened we've had that with kids too, with rumors starting, okay, you used to live in Oklahoma and this happened, and that's, they assume that Oklahoma is this big, so they must know them, and exactly what happens, yeah. I don't know how you prevent that.
We've had a very strong connection with Connecticut and St. John Valley, so there's been a lot of people that's kind of migrated back and forth. So we had a school teacher who had a friend who lived in that area and attended those schools. So it's a small world.
It's quick, and like you said, kids don't always understand that it's not every building being involved and not everything. Other questions? Gary?
Just based on your children being in a wife, so it's not,
Yeah. And prior issues have happened.
Yeah.
They only can take so much. I think you made a great choice there.
I was lucky enough that my daughter was smart enough. At the end of school, she saw the principal. And she went up to the principal and told the principal that all her friends died. And the principal looked at her and was like, knows all the loss that they've had. And was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so the principal immediately took my two children and brought them back into the school. She went running through the files to see if she could find something that said Sandra in Utah. So she didn't find anything that said that. So she reassured my daughter. And my son now, who's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Reassured them that, it was a tragic thing that happened, but what probably wasn't the friends.
Kudos to the principal
Yeah.
for taking quick
The
action.
principal was right on that. And she called me immediately afterwards to tell me this is it. They come home. And then the kids came home. I sat them down and said to them, it's always going to be people that are going to tell you things that aren't necessarily true, but that you need to, in your mind, try to think, what would my mommy do? If this were true, if my mommy had heard that from me, if it was really my friends. And, she said, no, she said, I know you did it. And I said, well, you need to think that way throughout the day. And I'm so sorry that, you lived through this, that you thinking all day might be your friends. But try to remember what we talked about here at home. How I handle other things with you.
And, I really encourage you, and I encourage all to continue those conversations with your children. Because the more of those conversations you can have that way, the closer you build a bond as a family, and they'll trust you with everything, and they'll end up telling you everything, good or bad. And that's important, because there are a lot of families, kids are eating by themselves, and that too can be traumatic at times, and mom and dad have their own social piece that they want to continue with their life, and the kids are kind of fending for themselves here and there. And if you can eat supper and go to church and do things together, ski together, snowmobile together, skate together, walk together, you'll have a wonderful bond as a family, and your kids will know your expectations and your values, and they'll continue those as adults themselves. So that was very, very good conversation with your kids.
Thank you. We had a question over there, John?
There's two dogs.
Okay, John Chenard.
I work with high school students, and in a situation like this, it's happened several times where sometimes you get kids responding very grossly insensitive, either to the people who have died or about what they'd like to do to the assailant. How do you respond to that in a public forum, when kids are speaking in a classroom, without really knocking the kid down? Because this may be their only way of dealing with it, but at the same time not, not inciting more violence and to make them think that it's a good way of dealing with violence.
We're nodding, Eve, you want to attack that one?
Well, I think you're kind of getting to a couple of things. I think you're pretty much making the observation already that someone who speaks about those events in a crude way, or kind of in a very vengeful way, is someone who feels both angry and helpless. You don't usually get that kind of bravado if someone's feeling entirely secure. So one response is to continue with what you already started with, is to kind of talk about, again, not pinpointing the individual who's speaking, but to talk about how these events arise from revenge and anger, and the importance of having a measured response. But also to look for something in the words that you heard so that you can reflect back to that speaker, something that will be reassuring to them. Or again, depends on the situation. You might, if it's very intense, you might say, you bring up some really good points. Let's you and I talk about this afterwards. If you really think it needs that kind of follow-up, or if it's in a setting where people can kind of branch out onto other topics. Again, with high school kids, they may be willing to talk about positive responses, like what are some of the political ramifications, what are some of the decisions that people make about their own safety, how do people handle feelings of grief and loss. They may be able to, turn in that direction. I don't know if that addresses your question. But high school kids they're very macho, and even the girls can be macho, wanting to show that they're in control and they're strong. And so they may make strong statements coming from that, and building them up and making them feel like they're safe and they can do something positive may help to satisfy the emotion behind it.
And I think I'd add too that sometimes I think we're expecting behaviors from younger kids instead of the real emotion. There's, it's usually emotion behind the behavior, but you'll get the different variety of disruptive behavior sometimes as a result of any kind of tragedy or trauma. But the same goes for older kids too, including high school kids. And especially kids, certainly, I think Scott had asked the question earlier, even in terms of, when you get professional help. And I think the other piece that happens too is kids that you know of that already struggle and have some emotional or mental health problems. You're a little more likely to get some of those kind of responses. And like Dr. Linsky was saying, being able to somehow channel that discussion and then pull them aside later, or let somebody know, because they're going to like there's a better chance that they'll need some further follow-up services than somebody who's not already struggling with some mental health issues. So those kids unfortunately would come quicker, rise to the surface a little quicker, I think.
I think it's very important that as school teachers, administrators, that we build that culture in school where we make the relationships with kids so we kind of know our kids well enough to know that we know that, you know, Johnny's going to come in tomorrow and he may be struggling with this situation because I know a little bit about Johnny. But I know Mr. Chenard really well. He's a great teacher, and I know that, like any other teacher, you don't want to squabble. There's no bad questions. When I was a teacher, there was no bad questions, and we're going to take, you make a point. Let's take a few minutes and have an adult conversation about this, and let's put some facts up on the board. Let's see what other people think about it here in class. Not that you're going to take all period, but you're going to take a little bit of time. And I know I've seen teachers do it. I've done it myself. But it's relationship building in our schools. We need to know who our kids are and get to know them on a level that we can understand them. And the better we can understand them, the better the class will be. The kids will learn, and teachers will have an easier time in school.
Did you have another question? Okay, and I'll get you, Kevin.
Okay, so this is mostly for Mr. Baker, obviously good there. So you were talking about the drills and procedures and the lockdown drills and the things that the teachers and administration are doing to sort of secure everything. And I wonder, and obviously this touches sort of on 9/11 and a lot of things that our entire country did after the fact, but we sort of went into a lockdown mode for a while, with the security lines and everything else. A lot of people might say, I'm sorry, I'm going to look into it, a lot of people might say that somewhat the terrorists were successful in causing problems within our own country because we took away a lot of our own civil liberties and things like that because we were afraid. And you're getting to the point of the question is at what point do you draw a line inside of the school system and say like certain maybe security measures or attitudes or ways you want to handle things will come to a point where it's taking away what it is to be a school and sort of almost taking away the feeling of security because kids feel like they have they're in lockdown.
Correct. And yeah, that's a great question. I was lucky enough to visit California last December, and I visited 7 different school districts while I was out there. I took a day and went to many different schools, and you're walking into schools that have 12-foot fences and barricaded all around because there's gang activity next door, and you can't go anywhere in that campus unless you have a principal walk with you. We're not like that up here, and I'm glad we're not like that because I don't want it to become penitentiaries. They are schools. They should be open to the public, and the public should be able to use them. But after a Sandy Hook and any other school shooting, as an administrator, you have a huge responsibility in making sure that your faculty, your staff, and your students, number one, are in a safe environment and can learn. And if they're scared while they're there, they're not going to learn. And if you can do little measures here and there, like we had with cameras have really saved a lot of time in our school. When kids start to do something wrong, we can catch them. We know who is at our doors now. Without cameras, we've had situations where people have just walked in our schools and it hasn't been very safe. And as much as we want kids involved in making some of these decisions, we actually talk to them about what we're going to do to our school and why. A lot of times we take that for granted. If we just talk to kids and tell them, here's why we're putting cameras in our school. Like, okay, that makes sense. They understand that. When we don't talk to them and kind of keep them out of the loop a little bit, then they start to say, why are we locking our doors and why are we doing this and why are we doing that? Well, we're trying to do it for you to keep you safe and make sure that the learning environment is something that you're comfortable in, and I think they'll understand that we kind of make that part of it.
Add to that, Donnie, I think everything is relative. We say we have certain safety measures for our community. But I don't think you ever get to the point where you can completely cover every possible angle. I had the unfortunate situation of actually visiting a very, very inner city school. I won't name the town. I don't want to offend anybody. It was in the Northeast, and I was actually there for a conference, and I was asked by the admissions office at the time to go visit the school and maybe recruit high school kids. And when I got into the cab to get to the school, I had made an appointment. And I told the cabbie where I was going. He said, "Are you kidding?" And I just said, "No." And I was, here at Fort Canyon, going, it'll be nice school, right? An armed guard met me at my cab and followed me everywhere as I went. And on the way into the school, told me that if I heard these sounds, that he would basically take over my body and throw me into some corner somewhere. He said, "Don't resist him." I was like, oh my God. But I talked to the guidance counselor there, who was also behind a cage, basically, and the guidance counselor, and this place had security. It was probably harder to get it. It's probably easier to get into Thomaston Prison than it is to get to the school. And the guidance counselor was like, "We don't have enough security here. This is not safe enough." And I was like, God, I became a religious person sitting there. I was so afraid of the place. It was so scary. And I can't even imagine learning going on in that place. But to them, that wasn't safe. And it wasn't enough. So everything's relative, I guess.
It's interesting because by main law, we have to do so many fire drills a year. Depending on the grade level in the school, we're going to do between 7 and 10 fire drills. Nobody does fire drills when it's 40 below. You know that. We try to do them all in the fall and the spring. But I was telling the staff when I gave a whole hour and a half talk on school safety the other day, and children are 1,000 times likely to get hurt in a school shooting than a fire. And this is my 23rd year in education, and I can't remember a school fire. But yet we have a state law that says we must do these fire drills. We have no state law right now that says we have to do lockdowns, although I think it's coming. I think they're going to say they're going to do 2 a year. But 1,000 times more likely to get hurt in a school shooting than a school fire. And we very rarely mandate schools to practice lockdowns. So,
I just wanted to add that I think in terms of the little bit of the change we've made just in the past couple of weeks, I can say as an employee, I've been aggravated at times because half the time I leave my office, I forget my keys. And, but I think one of the things, just like we talked about earlier about checking ourselves in terms of reacting to something, I've had to take a deep breath at times because I'm going to get a child and come back to my office, and if I start acting all frustrated about, I don't remember my keys, and luckily the secretaries are very good, joked about they're getting a lot of exercise hopping up and down and letting us back in. But I think as we slowly adjust to those, our attitude is going to make a difference for kids. So at times there's something in my head that's like, you can do this, just remember your key. And I'm not very good with keys anyway, but I think we can model for kids that, sometimes there's changes and we have to adapt to the change. And do I think it's a hassle? Yes, but a necessary hassle probably. And in time, it'll just seem like we always did that. So
and some of the procedures on campus, I've experienced some, and well, honestly, I my work, I go to the high school all the time, and they had to give me a key. They had to give me a card that I get so I don't have to buzz in every time, so because they know who I am. And so at this point, I have a little key that shows and buzzes me in. But I was going in not that long ago, and somebody who I didn't know was in the parking lot. And this person, in my normal experience, I would have been like, "What the hell, the door?" Because that's just who I am. But having swiped that key so often and knowing about what's going on, it made you think twice. So sometimes those things are an aggravation, but other times they really sort of make you think twice. Because I swiped myself in it and then shut the door, and he had to buzz in.
And people, may agree or disagree with me, but when you're dealing with children, there isn't enough safety. There just isn't. And you need to look at every little corner, every little way your school's set up or your school system, and how can you slow an intruder down, and how can you make it a little harder for somebody who wants to come in and do. We would never ever stop a parent who wants to come in and has an appointment with a teacher or a principal, ever. We never would. And we're not even stopping you now. These are just things we've been thinking of. If we're going to take it to another level, what are some things we can do? There are schools in Southern Maine you don't walk into unless you have an appointment. You don't. My daughter forgot her basketball sneakers. That could be the biggies.
You had a question back. She was doing what
I forget my question of what I wanted to say, but it goes along with what John was saying. There's the coffee shop and the TV and hospitality. especially from a middle school student, we do have a locked door policy. Kids are not allowed to open the doors for anybody who's coming in. And it was all about, well, what's the point of locking the door? And somebody can approach the door and the kid got up going and answer and teach them and he said, you don't want to do that. And she said, what's the point? Look at what happened in Connecticut. He just blew the walk out the door, so what's the point of what are we trying to do? There was a whole lot of cynicism happening. How do, and I've gotten a teaching in school, it was directed at me, like, why are we doing this? Why do we have so much faith? I guess I would like to have some better strategies or tips to be able to handle that. Because first of all, too, I feel the aggression coming out of her. So I just said, let's just knock inside the door. Because I could tell that she was very so I calmed her down by having a private conversation. But in hindsight, and reflecting on that, I would like to be able to do a whole process and say, how can we, what are we doing? As a school, we have, all these incentive programs going on to promote kindness, to be good to the community, to support the community, fill your bucket program, and the anti-bullying programs are ended so that people can learn to get along and be good people. In the first few days after the shooting, I found myself, especially in my middle school classes, I found myself repeating myself that this is why we do this. We're trying to raise good citizens of society. I mean, I'm all about learning about different artists and writers and so on. But in reality, what we want as a whole is for you to be prosperous citizens of society. So I found myself doing that a lot, but I would like to have some strategies to be able to deal with the cynicism that catches me off guard.
Yeah, go ahead. I saw you
I just want to respond to that a little bit. You said middle school students. One of the things that we think of as being like a high emotional IQ or coping skill in a prosperous citizen as an adult is the ability to reflect on things in proportion and to not fall victim to black and white thinking. And so, when that could, yes, that's a cynical point of view. Well, nothing can keep us safe, so why should we bother? That's an example of black and white thinking. And a more logical, proportionate approach is, it's true, we can't prevent every possible source of danger, but if we make it more difficult for someone to casually come in the building, we're eliminating a certain level of threat. Okay, so kind of like hope for the best, prepare for the worst kind of approach. And to be able to describe to the answer that you're looking for, and some of them are kind of strategic answers, like, yes, you're right, we can't prevent a nuclear bomb from blowing up the school if someone's really determined to do that. But we could, for example, prevent an impulsive, disgruntled person who isn't really totally, if we slow them down with a locked door, they may change their mind. So there are valid reasons for it. But a person who's in that angry mode, you said they felt the aggression, they're kind of stuck in that black-white thinking that adolescents have. And part of the emotional IQ training process is, validating the emotion, recognizing it, and then trying to kind of chip away at, first of all, making that person feel secure. You're not going to have a rational discussion while they're feeling insecure. But just recognize that this is a sign of adolescence, this is black and white thinking, what's the point? And we need to model to people that, yeah, things can look pretty bad, but there's always a point, there's always a reason to try to make it better.
I fully agree. I mean, when I work with teachers and students and parents, kids will react to things and adults don't react to things because they think things are and kids will react. Middle school kids react to things all the time. You're going to take that from him, or try this, or look what I have, you should get one too. They just react to it. They don't think, and adults think, and kids don't. And so we need to really kind of work that through with everybody, that sometimes that reaction of anger, or sometimes that reaction of doing something stupid is like normal. And it's a lesson, and I'm going to, there's a huge amount of pressure on kids today as teenagers. Huge amount. And I think schools need to be open to that, work with parents, work with, growing up in today's society with everything that's available to them that was never available to us. Put so much pressure on them to be, good grades, act right, go to practice, do your homework, meet the needs of your family, go out with your friends. I mean, I would just, I'm appalled by it sometimes at the pressure that's put on kids. And I think, you're very valid in what you're saying and how you react, and you need to react to it, because there is times where we just have to talk to kids, and instead of just teach them English or teach them math, we need to talk to them. And those are teachable moments in the real world.
And I think, too, the other piece is that when you talk about whole class, and granted there's pressure because you have to teach whatever you teach, but even just, every once in a while, it's easy for me to say because I don't have a whole class, but just taking that opportunity, because there's, I'm sure without too much trouble, you can find some really good exercise, even a lesson about stress, and there's good communication stuff out there that would be a whole exercise on black and white thinking, and how we all get to that point depending on our stress level. And how, if we think this way, what happens? If we think this way, what happens? Because every kid, every person needs to take a look at that every once in a while. So those are good whole class things that you can do too.
And I think sometimes the schools are making a mistake in making it a one-time event, when, every faculty meeting we should be talking about school safety. It takes us 5 minutes. The next meeting could be a half an hour. It could be something. Because I asked about what are the what-ifs. Keep going back to your building and look at the what-ifs. And what if this happened, what if that happened? And if we ask the what ifs, we're better prepared if something was going to happen. We're better off to have a plan than nothing at all. But a lot of times Columbine happens and then it goes away. And 9/11 happens and then it goes away. And we get back to the routines, and we always got to keep reminding ourselves and staying a little bit current with it all the time.
I
had a question. Someone once told me that a locked door just keeps the honest people out. And unfortunately, Sandy Hook is such an example of that. My question is, what other resources are you working with if something should happen? Because we're such a rural area. We had we had 2 police officers on duty at the time. So what other resources are you working with?
Good question. Just the last week here, I've met with the Sheriff's Department in my office, and I've met with the town police, and I need to meet with the state police. Just for what you said, we are very rural, and I need them to work with me on if something would happen in one of our outlying schools. What is your protocol? Does it go across the radio? Does the Border Patrol get involved? Does the game wardens get involved? And they reassured me that when something like that, then all the agencies do get a call and they respond to it immediately. I've been through a training like that back in 2000, where I actually have to watch exactly what happens when they enter a school if there's a shooter. But I'll be honest with you, that is one of my biggest concerns, that we have some schools right now that are small and they're out in the rural areas, and on a good day, making sure that response time is good. And I'm going to be meeting with all the law enforcement hopefully next week or the week after to further discuss this. I've asked the sheriffs on their way by to stop in the schools, to ride around, stop in, walk around. The town officers now are riding around the buildings and going in. I talked to them about that last week.
I can reply a little bit as well, having been on the emergency management team, and Janine, you remember some of our joint efforts. One of the things that I'm not sure if it's not perfect, of course it's not. I know all the big institutions, the school districts, the hospitals, the university, all has a pretty intense plan. And the one thing that I find more, actually it's sort of reflected tonight, we all have each other's plans as part of our plans. So, if there's a major tragedy at UMFK, I know that the hospital and AMHC and the school districts will send us their counselors, and we'll do the same, and those kinds, and we'll share buildings, and we'll do things, emergency spaces, and response to we have certain people that can do certain things, and we have certain talents, and so I think part of, we may be limited in response, but we do have a pretty strong collaborative approach to things, which I think, when you're small in numbers, you got to do what you got to do, right? So that makes me feel better, anyway, that we're all coordinated to a certain extent. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think we do a pretty good job. I mean, the Catholic Church has been used as a place to go to during, a bomb threat. It's like all the big players are working together on those kinds of things. So, yes.
My question though is, how do you instill all of this, all the security measures, all of this manuals, how does all of this impact our children? And because to me, automatically, by having all of this, you also instill fear into our children. I was raised in a very, very difficult city. And we had a policeman in Manila High School at all times. And so I was raised with this level of alertness, okay? But at the same time, we know that we fear. I mean, our children are always so short a period of time that I think we should protect them from not feeling this fear that we as adults have fear.
Connie, you want to address that because you work in the schools? So you're nodding. If you nod during a question, I nod back.
It was kind of a nod and kind of not. That's a tricky one. I think in general, even when I think about the few changes we've made recently, kids seem fine. I can't say all kids. I think the vast majority of kids seem fine as long as we're handling the changes okay. I think that's a big piece of it.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, as adults, we're fearful. That's why this discussion is happening. So it's we really got to be looking at how can we not impact them in the children.
What I do for myself and what I would do for a child is sort of admit and acknowledge that there are beautiful things that happen and you can't control what other people do. There are going to be people that are going to do bad things. But if you look at the whole picture, there were so many more good people. There were more helpers than there were bad people. And I think, that was a Mr. Rogers thing. Mr. Rogers came out and said, we were helpers. And one of the teachers that had the kids locked in the bathroom said, you got to wait for the boys to come. It made sense to say that to the kids standing on the toilet and, I don't know how many kids were locked in the little tiny bathroom.
And show me your smiley face instead of crying. I really do believe that's how the adults react in the building to everything is how the kids are going to react to it too. I try to be pretty visual in all the schools, and I haven't seen where kids feel very nervous about why we're here today. I did have a mom call me the Monday after, and I told her I understand. She said, "Tim, you need to promise me that they're going to happen to my daughter." And I'm like, I can't. I'd be lying to you right now if I told you that. She said, "Well, I know, I'm just having a hard time." And I said, "Well, my daughter went to school this morning, and we're having a hard time." And I called her back at lunch. She said, "I'm so glad I got to talk to you. I need to talk to somebody." So teachers are very, they're professional people, and when the time is there to be there, they're there. They're engaged. They're focused on what's going to happen. And like I told you, they love these kids. They're not gonna make their classes any different because we have a camera in the hallway or a locked door in the hallway. It's making those experiences wonderful.
And because in responding to your question, when I think about what you said earlier, that a piece of that can happen because of previous losses too. So that some of that might be an individual conversation, and as they heal from other losses, then maybe, I'm not saying fear would go away, but it would certainly shrink. I think that can be a piece of it too, because it's different.
I also think educational professionals need to, on the other side of this, need to understand. When I was dean of students here for a number of years, and even at the college level, we would have parents, if there was something going on, especially in the rest halls at night, and a mom got a call or a text, from a child, from one of their children. There were times I would get phone calls at home or the next day, and sometimes I would sort of grumble that. I'd be like, another parent's calling. And then, but I remember stepping back once and thinking, yeah, but this person is 200 miles or 10 miles or even a mile away from their child. And, you're responsible for them, and they place that expectation on you. And I think you have to sort of remember that as a professional, no matter what you do or teach or administrate. You have to be empathetic with a parent who's away. There's most showing to me was at 9/11. Many parents went to school to get their kids. I called my mom. I was 30-something years old. You know what I mean? So you have that. There's that connection, and you want to be near them. And if they're not near them, sometimes it's really hard to deal with. You have to. I think educators need to understand it. You need to be empathetic to that kind of thing.
And just generational, what we've done and the role kids have played in generations. I mean, I went to New Jersey with my parents in the front seat of the pickup across their lap sleeping. They'd be thrown in jail today because they weren't in a car seat or a seat belt. And we can't cross customs here anymore the way we used to. We have to stop and give all our passports. And the airports, well, we can talk all night about airports. And this world has changed. And I think it was mentioned tonight about 9/11 and what it did to us. And I really think Columbine had a bigger effect on schools than 9/11 did. Columbine really reshaped how we're going to handle things at schools. It got us talking about locked doors, where we're going to park vehicles, if there's a stranger out front. Columbine really, and these weren't intruders, they were kids who went to school there. And, when you shoot a door 26 times, like the guy did in Sandy Hook, and then you take out half the people that went to attack you, what are you going to do? I mean, there are parts of me that feel that schools may need to become aggressors. Just keep kids safe, and it would never hurt. We'd have never thought of that 10 years ago. What are you talking about, being an aggressor? Well, there are things we may have to.
Well, it's interesting. We had Vern Willett speak on our campus last week, and Vern said that the initial thinking in reactions to intruders and shooters used to be to hide and run away, and that's still part of the protocol. But he said there's a lot of research right now and a lot of thought about maybe. If push comes to shove, and that's a very minimal way of saying it, but sometimes the counterattack it may have to take place, and it's a scary thing to think of. But you never know how you're going to react, of course, right? In that situation. We've had about an hour and a half. If there are any other burning questions from the audience, or I don't want to. If there are any last thoughts from any of the panelists, or do we feel that we've covered all of our bases?
We had some great questions.
I think we have. I just want to take a moment to thank all the panelists tonight for doing this. We pulled this together in a very short period of time, and I had wonderful resources to work with within the university and the school district and the hospital. So I just want to thank everybody for being here and taking your time to pull all this together and for doing all the research you've done. And thank you all for being here. And I want to remind you that we have some handouts for you on the way out. And Eve, do you want to explain what your handout is?
There are some interesting websites and so on. There's people, I think there's a list of those that have some advice to parents and anybody who works with children. The NIH, the National Institutes of Health, have actually published a short booklet about how to deal with traumatic situations with children. It's short, it's bulleted, it's very clear, and it's both clear and somewhat specific, and it deals with children at different age levels, what the developmental expectations are. And I just copied 2 pages, it's about 15 pages long, and I just copied 2 of the kind of the core pages from that, but you can get the whole document
Yeah,
online.
the link for your whole document is on the list I created,
great.
Connie sent me, with some other sites to go to. So I'll leave these here for anybody who wants them. And just want to thank you all for coming tonight, and have a nice trip home.
Thank you.